The dust hadn't even settled on her mother's grave when the first stone shattered the window of their small house on the edge of Redemption, Texas. And Clara Whitmore knew then that her life in this town was about to become impossible. It was the spring of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dry earth as Clara swept up the glass with trembling hands. Her mother had been the buffer, the one person in town who had enough respect that folks kept their ugliest thoughts to themselves. But Margaret Whitmore had succumbed to fever just 3 days ago, and now Clara stood alone in a world that had never quite known what to make of her. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and worst of all in the eyes of Redemption's God-fearing citizens. She could read and write better than most men in town. She kept books, real books, stacked in her small bedroom, and she had opinions about things that women were not supposed to have opinions about. Her mother had educated her, had taught her that her mind was worth something, and for that gift Clara would be forever grateful. But that gift had also made her dangerous in the eyes of people who believed a woman's place was firmly beneath a man's boot. The second stone came an hour later, and this time it was accompanied by a voice. "Witch," someone called from the street. Clara didn't go to the window to see who it was. She knew it could have been anyone. Half the town thought she was cursed because she had been born with one green eye and one blue eye, a condition her mother had explained was just a quirk of nature, nothing more. But superstition ran deeper than logic in places like Redemption. She spent that evening boarding up the broken window with planks of wood, her hands aching from the work. The house felt emptier than ever without her mother's presence, without her gentle humming as she prepared supper or her soft voice reading aloud from the Bible before bed. Clara had never felt more alone. The next morning, she walked into town to buy supplies from the general store, keeping her head high even as conversations stopped when she passed. Mrs. Henderson clutched her daughter close as if Clara carried some contagion. "Mr. Bailey spat tobacco juice near her feet, close enough to be an insult but not close enough that she could call him on it directly. Inside the store, the proprietor, a thin man named Jasper Cole, refused to meet her eyes as he tallied her purchases. "That will be $4, he said, though Clara knew the items she had selected should have cost no more than $2.50. "That seems high," she said quietly. "Prices have gone up," Jasper replied, his jaw set. "If you do not like it, you can shop elsewhere." They both knew there was nowhere else to shop for 50 miles. Clara counted out the money from her rapidly dwindling savings and left without another word. She could feel eyes boring into her back as she walked down the dusty main street, her basket of goods clutched tight against her side. That afternoon, Reverend Michaels came to her door. He was a tall man with silver hair and cold gray eyes that had never held any warmth when they looked at Clara. "Miss Whitmore," he said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "The town council has asked me to speak with you." "About what?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "About your situation. You are a young woman alone, without protection, without guidance. It is not proper. The council believes it would be best if you were to leave Redemption and perhaps find family elsewhere who could care for you." Clara felt her spine stiffen. "I have no family elsewhere, Reverend. This is my home. My mother is buried here. Your mother, God rest her soul, is beyond earthly concerns now. You, however, must think of your future and your reputation. There are already whispers about you, girl. Whispers that could become something worse if you insist on remaining here without a husband or a father to vouch for your character. Whispers that you have no doubt encouraged," Clara said, her voice sharper than she intended. The Reverend's face darkened. "Mind your tongue. I am trying to help you, though you seem determined to refuse good counsel. I will tell the council that you are being stubborn. What happens next will be on your own head." He left, and Clara sank into her mother's old rocking chair, her heart pounding. She knew what happens next meant. They would make her life unbearable until she had no choice but to leave. They would drive her out through cruelty and isolation, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. But Clara had inherited more than her education from her mother. She had also inherited stubbornness, a fierce determination not to be pushed around simply because the world thought women should be meek and mild. If they wanted her gone, they would have to do more than throw stones and raise prices. The harassment escalated over the following week. Someone painted the word witch across her door in red paint that looked sickeningly like blood. Her small vegetable garden was trampled in the night, and the chickens she kept for eggs disappeared one by one. She filed a complaint with the sheriff, a lazy man named Tobias Grant, but he just shrugged and said he could not investigate every little incident in town. Maybe if you made more of an effort to fit in, people would not feel so inclined to cause you trouble, he suggested, his feet propped up on his desk. A woman alone always raises questions. Questions about the men who are harassing her, I should hope, Clara snapped, but the sheriff just waved her away. She was running out of options and running out of money. Without her mother's sewing income and with the inflated prices at the general store, Clara's savings were disappearing fast. She had begun to wonder if leaving truly was her only choice when she saw him for the first time. He rode into town on a hot Tuesday morning on a paint horse that looked as road-weary as its rider. The man himself was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore dusty trail clothes and a Stetson that had seen better days, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who was comfortable being alone. Clara was walking back from the creek where she did her washing when she saw him tying his horse outside the saloon. He glanced her way, and their eyes met for just a moment. She saw something flicker in his expression, surprise perhaps, at her mismatched eyes. But unlike most people, he did not look away in disgust or fear. Instead, he tipped his hat to her, a small gesture of courtesy that no one in Redemption had shown her in weeks. She felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked down, hurrying past. She did not know who he was, but she could not afford to draw any more attention to herself by being seen staring at a strange man. His name, she learned later that day when she overheard gossip at the well, was James Thornton, and he was a cowboy who had been working on a ranch up north. He was passing through Redemption on his way to somewhere else, or so people assumed. No one expected him to stay. Men like him never did, but James Thornton surprised everyone. He took a room at the boarding house and spent his days walking around the outskirts of town, looking at the land with an assessing eye. He spoke little and kept to himself, but there was something about him that commanded a certain respect. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, or maybe it was the gun he wore low on his hip, the mark of a man who knew how to use it. Clara did not think about him much. She had her own problems to worry about. The attacks on her property continued, and she had taken to sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. She knew she could not go on like this much longer. Either she would have to leave, or something would have to change. The change came on a Friday night when a group of men, emboldened by whiskey and self-righteousness, decided to take matters into their own hands. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and stumbled out of bed to find her front porch ablaze. Flames licked up the dry wood, spreading fast in the arid Texas air. She screamed and grabbed a bucket, running to the water barrel outside. Her hands shook as she threw water on the flames, but it was not enough. The fire was too big, spreading too fast. She was going to lose everything, the house her parents had built, her mother's things, the life she had tried so desperately to hold on to. "Get back," a voice shouted, and suddenly someone was pulling her away from the flames. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders and pushed her aside, and then the stranger, James Thornton, was there with his own bucket, throwing water on the fire with quick, efficient movements. He worked fast, his face grim in the firelight, and somehow, miraculously, he managed to get the flames under control before they could consume the entire house. The porch was badly damaged, charred and smoking, but the main structure was intact. Clara stood in her nightgown, shaking and covered in soot, staring at the ruin of her porch. She felt tears streaming down her face but could not seem to stop them. "Are you hurt?" James asked, turning to her. His face was smudged with ash, his shirt soaked with water and sweat. She shook her head, unable to speak. Who did this? His voice was hard, angry in a way that made her look up at him. I do not know, could have been anyone. Why would anyone want to burn down your house? Clara laughed, a bitter sound. Because they want me gone, the whole town wants me gone. James looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Why? Because I am different, because I can read and write and do not know my place, because of my eyes, because I exist without a man to control me. Take your pick. He frowned, looking back at the smoldering porch. That is a damn fool reason to try to kill someone. Welcome to Redemption, Texas, Mr. Thornton. He looked surprised that she knew his name, but he did not comment on it. Instead, he said, You cannot stay here, not tonight, it is not safe. I have nowhere else to go. Then I will stay. I will sleep on what is left of your porch and make sure no one comes back. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she did not need his help, but the truth was that she did. She was exhausted and terrified, and the thought of someone standing guard, even a stranger, was more comforting than she wanted to admit. Why would you do that? She asked. You do not even know me, James shrugged. Do not need to know you to know that what is happening here is not right. Now go inside and get some rest. I will be out here if you need anything. She went inside, but she did not sleep. She sat in her mother's rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, and watched through the window as James Thornton settled himself on the edge of the ruined porch, his rifle across his knees. He stayed awake all night, a silent guardian against the darkness. When dawn came, Clara made coffee and brought him a cup. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, and they sat together in silence as the sun rose over the Texas plains. Thank you, Clara said finally, for last night. You are welcome, but this is not going to stop, is it? They are going to keep coming after you until you leave or until something worse happens. I know, but I do not have anywhere to go. This house is all I have left. James was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. Then he said, What if you did have somewhere to go? Somewhere away from this town, but still yours, Clara frowned. What do you mean? I have been looking at land out past the ridge, about 10 miles from here. There is a good spot near a creek, sheltered by cottonwoods with plenty of grazing land. I was thinking of buying it, building a house, starting a small ranch. It is far enough from town that people would leave you alone, but close enough that you could still get supplies if you needed them. That sounds like a plan for you, Mr. Thornton. What does it have to do with me? He looked at her directly, his blue eyes steady. I could build a house big enough for two. You could live there, help with the ranch. You would be safe, and you would still have a home. Clara stared at him. You are suggesting that I, a woman you met yesterday, move out to the middle of nowhere with you, a man I do not know. You understand how that sounds, do not you? I do. And I am not suggesting anything improper. You would have your own room, your own space. I am just offering you a way out of this situation. You can say no, and I will not hold it against you, but I think you know as well as I do that staying here is going to get you killed. He was right, and Clara hated that he was right. She looked at the burned porch, at the word witch still faintly visible on her door beneath a coat of whitewash she had applied. She thought about the stones, the poisoned chickens, the fear that had become her constant companion. Why would you do this for me? She asked. What do you get out of it? James shrugged. Company, I suppose, help with the work. It is hard to build a ranch alone, and I am not getting any younger. I am 28 and tired of drifting. I want to put down roots, build something that is mine. But I also cannot stand by and watch innocent people get hurt. My mother raised me better than that. There was something in his voice when he mentioned his mother, a softness that made Clara think there was a story there, but she did not push. Instead, she said, I need time to think about it. Take all the time you need, but do not take too long. I do not think whoever set that fire last night is going to give up. He was right about that too. That very afternoon, as Clara was trying to salvage what she could from the porch, Reverend Michaels appeared with 2 members of the town council. They looked at the burned wood with expressions that might have been satisfaction, though they tried to hide it. "Miss Whitmore, this is clearly a sign from God that you are not meant to stay here," the Reverend said. "The council has decided that for your own safety and the safety of the town, you must leave Redemption within the week." "For my safety," Clara repeated incredulously. "Someone tried to burn down my house and you are blaming me." "We are not blaming anyone," said Mr. Harrington, one of the council members. "We are simply recognizing that your presence here has caused unrest. If you leave, that unrest will end. And if I refuse—" The three men exchanged glances. "Then we will be forced to take other measures. We could declare this property abandoned and claim it for the town. We could have the sheriff remove you. Please do not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. But she also felt the weight of defeat. She could not fight the entire town. She could not win against their laws and their prejudices and their determination to be rid of her. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "I will leave." The Reverend nodded, looking pleased with himself. "A wise decision. May God guide your path, Miss Whitmore." She did not watch them leave. Instead, she went inside and began to pack her things, her hands shaking with anger and grief. She packed her mother's Bible, her few dresses, the books she treasured. She packed the photograph of her parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful, unaware of what the future would bring. That evening, James Thornton came back. "I heard what happened," he said. "The whole town is talking about it. Then you heard that I have a week to leave. Your offer, if it still stands, I would like to accept it." James nodded slowly. "It still stands. I am glad you are getting out of here, even if these are not the circumstances I would have wanted." "When do we leave?" "I need a few days to finalize the land purchase and get supplies. How about 4 days from now? That will give you time to pack and settle your affairs here." "I do not have any affairs to settle. I am ready to leave whenever you are." 4 days, James said firmly. "I want to do this right. I want to have supplies and materials ready so we can start building as soon as we get out there. Trust me, it will be worth the wait." Clara did not know if she trusted him, but she did not have much choice. She agreed to wait, and James left to make his preparations. Over the next few days, Clara saw him around town, loading a wagon with lumber and tools, buying supplies from the general store. People watched him curiously, whispering about what the stranger was up to. Clara kept to herself, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. She sold what furniture she could, though no one wanted to pay a fair price for her mother's things. In the end, she practically gave it all away, keeping only what she could carry. On the night before they were to leave, there was a knock on her door. Clara opened it cautiously to find a woman standing there, someone she recognized from church but had never spoken to. The woman's name was Sarah, and she looked nervous. "I wanted to give you this," Sarah said, holding out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It is just some bread and preserves for your journey. I know things have been hard for you here, and I wanted you to know that not everyone in this town agrees with how you have been treated." Clara took the bundle, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. That is very kind. I wish I could have done more, could have spoken up, but my husband, he is on the council and he would not have allowed it. I am sorry." "You do not need to apologize," Clara said softly. "I understand. Thank you for this." Sarah nodded and hurried away, looking over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. Clara closed the door and set the bundle on the table, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Even in the worst of places, there could be small kindnesses. She would remember that. The next morning, James arrived with his wagon and his paint horse. He helped Clara load her few belongings into the back, along with all the supplies he had gathered. The wagon was full of lumber, nails, tools, sacks of flour and beans, a plow, and a dozen other things they would need to start their new life. Clara took one last look at the house where she had grown up, at the burned porch and the boarded-up window. She thought about her mother, buried in the cemetery on the hill, and silently promised that she would not forget. Then she climbed up onto the wagon seat beside James, and they set off. The town was just waking up as they rolled down the main street. A few people came out to watch them leave. but no one said goodbye. Clara kept her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. They drove in silence for the first hour, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough terrain. The land around them was flat and endless, covered in dry grass and scattered mesquite trees. The sky was a brilliant blue, cloudless and vast. Finally, James spoke. "Are you all right?" Clara considered the question. Was she all right? She had just lost everything, had been driven from her home by fear and hatred. But she was also free, away from the people who had made her life miserable. She was heading toward something new, something unknown but possibly better. "I think I will be," she said. "Eventually," James nodded. "It is going to be hard work, what we are doing, building a ranch from nothing. There will be long days and setbacks and times when you wonder if it was worth it. I am not afraid of hard work. I did not think you were, but I wanted you to know what you are getting into. This is not going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is," Clara said, echoing something her mother used to say. They drove on, leaving redemption behind. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the landscape began to change. They passed through a narrow canyon where red rock walls rose on either side, then emerged into a wide valley. A creek ran through the center of it, lined with cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. "There," James said, pointing. "That is where I am thinking we should build." Clara looked where he was pointing and saw a gentle rise near the creek, sheltered by a grove of cottonwoods. The land around it was good grazing land, and she could see where the creek widened into a small pool, perfect for watering livestock. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. "I thought so too. It is far enough from town that people will not bother us, but the land is good. We can run cattle here, grow a garden, build a life." They spent the rest of the day unloading the wagon and setting up a temporary camp. James showed Clara how to build a proper fire for cooking, and they made a simple supper of beans and bread. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat by the fire and talked. James told her about his life, how he had grown up in Missouri on a small farm. His parents had died of cholera when he was 16, and he had spent the next 12 years drifting from ranch to ranch, working as a cowboy. He had saved his money carefully, always with the dream of having his own place someday. "What about you?" he asked. "How did you end up in Redemption?" Clara told him about her parents, how they had come to Texas from Virginia after the war, looking for a fresh start. Her father had died when she was 10, kicked by a horse, leaving her mother to raise her alone. Her mother had been a seamstress, talented and hardworking, and she had made sure Clara learned to read and write and think for herself. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," James said. "She was. I miss her every day." They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Clara felt something she had not felt in a long time: peace. There was something about this place, this wild, empty land, that called to her. Maybe here she could finally be herself without fear. The next morning, they began the real work. James had a plan for the house, a simple but sturdy design with 2 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen. They would build it from the lumber he had brought and from wood they could cut from the surrounding area. Clara had never built anything in her life, but she was a quick learner. James showed her how to measure and cut boards, how to hammer nails straight, how to fit pieces together so they would hold. Her hands were soft from years of sewing and cooking, and within the first day they were covered in blisters. But she did not complain. She worked alongside James from dawn until dusk, determined to prove that she could hold her own. As the days passed, the frame of the house began to take shape. It was slow, exhausting work, especially in the Texas heat, but there was also something deeply satisfying about it. Clara was building something with her own hands, creating a home that was truly hers. She had never felt more capable or more alive. James was a patient teacher and a steady presence. He never talked down to her or treated her as if she were fragile. When she made a mistake, he showed her how to fix it without making her feel foolish. When she did something well, he praised her work with genuine respect, They developed a rhythm, a way of working together that felt natural. In the mornings, they would work on the house. In the afternoons, when the heat became too intense, they would rest in the shade of the cottonwoods or work on smaller tasks like tending to the horses or preparing meals. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Clara found herself looking forward to those evening conversations. James was easy to talk to, thoughtful and curious. He asked her about her books, and she was surprised to discover that he could read too, though he said he had not had much opportunity to practice. She began reading aloud to him at night, starting with a collection of short stories she had brought with her. He would sit and listen, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and sometimes she would glance up and catch him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. After 3 weeks, the frame of the house was complete, and they began working on the walls and roof. James had to ride into a neighboring town to buy more supplies, leaving Clara alone for 2 days. She was nervous at first, unused to being so isolated, but she also found that she enjoyed the solitude. She worked on the house at her own pace, and in the evenings she sat by the creek and watched the stars come out, feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. When James returned, he brought news from the town. "I heard some men talking about redemption," he said as they unloaded the wagon. "Sounds like there has been some trouble. A barn fire, some stolen cattle. People are pointing fingers, blaming each other. Your Reverend Michaels is apparently trying to hold things together, but it is not working." Clara felt a grim satisfaction at that. Maybe they will realize that I was not the problem after all. Maybe, though people like that rarely admit when they are wrong. By the end of the 2nd month, the house was habitable. It was not fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was solid and it was theirs. James had built a stone fireplace that would keep them warm in the winter, and Clara had sewn curtains for the windows from fabric James had bought. They moved their belongings inside, and for the first time since leaving Redemption, Clara slept in a real bed under a real roof. She stood in the main room the next morning, looking around at what they had accomplished, and felt tears prick her eyes. This was a home, a real home, built with hard work and determination. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "What do you think?" James asked, coming up behind her. "I think it is perfect," she said honestly. He smiled, and Clara realized that she had not seen him smile much before. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, happier. "I am glad you are here," he said. "I could not have done this alone." "Yes, you could have. It would have just taken longer, maybe, but it would not have meant as much." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Clara felt something shift between them. It was subtle, like a change in the wind, but it was there. She realized that somewhere along the way, James had stopped being a stranger and had become something more, a partner, a friend. Maybe even something beyond that, though she was not quite ready to put a name to it yet. With the house finished, they turned their attention to the rest of the ranch. James built a small barn for the horses and a chicken coop. Clara started a vegetable garden near the creek, planting seeds she had brought from Redemption, and new ones James had bought in town. They dug irrigation ditches and built fences and planned where they would graze cattle once they had the money to buy a herd. The work was endless, but Clara did not mind. She woke each morning with a sense of purpose, knowing that every bit of effort she put in would make their ranch stronger, their lives more secure. Her hands grew calloused and her skin tanned from hours in the sun. She had never been stronger or healthier. One evening, as they were finishing supper, James said, "I have been thinking, we should give this place a name." "A name? Every ranch needs a name, something that means something to us." Clara thought about it. "What about New Hope Ranch?" "Because that is what this place is for both of us. A new beginning, a new hope," James smiled. "I like that. New Hope Ranch it is." As summer turned to fall, the landscape around them changed. The grass turned golden, and the cottonwood leaves turned bright yellow before drifting down to carpet the ground. The air grew cooler, especially at night, and James talked about needing to stock up on firewood before winter came. They made a trip into the neighboring town for supplies, and Clara was nervous about how people would react to her. But the town, called Silver Creek, was larger than Redemption and more diverse. No one gave her a second glance, and she felt herself relaxing. They bought supplies, and James introduced her as his business partner to the shopkeeper, which earned them both a curious look but no judgment. On the way back to the ranch, Clara said, "That was easier than I expected." "Not everyone is like the people in Redemption," James said. "Most folks do not care what you look like or what you do as long as you are not causing them trouble." "I wish I had known that sooner." "Would it have changed anything?" Clara thought about it. "No, I suppose not. My mother was buried in Redemption. I could not have left her. But you can now." "Yes, I can now." When they got back to the ranch, Clara realized with a start that this place felt more like home than Redemption ever had. She felt safe here, free to be herself without judgment or fear. And she realized that a large part of that feeling came from James himself, from his steady presence and his unwavering respect for her. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara found herself watching him. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. His face was peaceful content, and she wondered if he felt the same sense of belonging that she did. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. "What are you thinking about? About how different my life is now compared to 3 months ago, about how much has changed. Do you regret it?" "Leaving Redemption, coming here?" "No, not for a second. Do you regret bringing me here?" "No," he said firmly. "This place would not be the same without you. I would not be the same without you." There was something in his voice, something vulnerable and honest that made Clara's heart beat faster. She wanted to say something, to tell him that she felt the same way, but she did not know how to put it into words. Before she could figure it out, James stood up. "I should get some rest. We have a lot of work tomorrow." "James, wait." He turned back to her, and Clara stood up, closing the distance between them. She was not sure what she was doing, only that she could not let this moment pass without acknowledging what was happening between them. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything you have done for me. For seeing me as a person, not as something strange or dangerous. For building this place and letting me be a part of it." James reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. "Clara, you are the strongest, smartest, most capable woman I have ever met. I did not let you be a part of this. You made it what it is. We made it together." She felt tears well up in her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of gratitude and something deeper. Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, tentative press of her lips against his. For a moment, James froze, surprised. Then he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, and it felt like coming home. Clara melted into his embrace, feeling safe and wanted and valued in a way she never had before. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. James rested his forehead against hers and said, "I have wanted to do that for weeks, but I did not want to push you. I did not want you to think that I expected anything in return for helping you. I know you did not expect anything. That is one of the reasons I care about you. You have never asked me to be anything other than myself. Because yourself is pretty damn wonderful." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This man, this place, this life. It was all right. That night, Clara lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind was racing, replaying the kiss over and over. She had never felt this way about anyone before. There had been no opportunities for romance in Redemption, no young men who had been brave enough to court the strange girl with the mismatched eyes. She had resigned herself to a life alone, and now suddenly everything had changed. In the morning, things felt different between them, but not in a bad way. There was a new awareness, a tenderness in the way they moved around each other. James smiled at her more often, and Clara caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. They continued their work on the ranch, but now there were stolen moments of affection. A touch on the shoulder as they passed each other, sitting closer together by the fire at night. Holding hands as they walked down to the creek to fetch water. Winter arrived slowly in Texas, bringing cooler temperatures but rarely any snow. They spent more time indoors, and Clara set up a small workspace where she could sew and mend their clothes. James worked on building furniture, a proper table and chairs, shelves for Clara's books. One evening, as the wind howled outside and they sat close to the fire, James said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." Clara set down the shirt she was mending. "All right." "Do you see a future here? With me, with this ranch?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "I do. This is the first place I have ever felt like I truly belong." James nodded, looking relieved. "I am glad, because I have been thinking a lot about us, about what we are to each other. We started as strangers, became partners, and now we are something more. I care about you, Clara, more than I have ever cared about anyone." "I care about you too," Clara said, her heart pounding. "Then I want to make this official. I want to marry you if you will have me. Not because it is proper or because people expect it, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Clara felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne. She was going to marry James Thornton, the cowboy who had saved her life and built her a home on the edge of nowhere. She was going to have the life she had never dared to dream of. They were married a week later in Silver Creek by a justice of the peace. There was no fancy dress or big celebration, just the two of them and two witnesses they pulled off the street. But as Clara stood beside James and spoke her vows, she felt more certain of anything than she ever had in her life. After the ceremony, they bought supplies and headed back to the ranch. It was late afternoon when they arrived, and the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and red. Clara stood beside the wagon and looked at the house they had built, at the barn and the garden and the corral where their horses grazed. This was home. This was where she belonged. That night, Clara and James consummated their marriage, and it was tender and sweet and everything she had hoped it would be. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, James whispered, "I love you, Clara Thornton." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "I love you too." Winter passed quietly, and spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers that covered the valley in color. Clara's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables, and James managed to buy a small herd of cattle from a rancher who was moving north. They spent long days working the ranch and long nights wrapped in each other's arms, planning their future. One warm spring evening, as they sat on the porch James had built to replace the one that had burned in redemption, Clara said, "I have been feeling strange lately. Tired and a little nauseous in the mornings." James looked at her with concern. "Are you sick?" "No, I do not think so. I think I might be pregnant." His eyes widened and then a grin spread across his face. "Really? Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. I have missed my monthly courses and all the signs are there. If I am right, we will have a baby sometime in the fall." James pulled her into a tight embrace, laughing with joy. "We are going to be parents. Clara, that is incredible." She laughed too, feeling his excitement wash over her. She had wondered how he would react, whether he would be ready for this responsibility. But his joy was genuine and infectious, and she felt her own happiness grow. As her pregnancy progressed, James became even more protective. He insisted she not lift anything heavy and took over many of the more strenuous chores. Clara protested at first, insisting she was perfectly capable, but eventually she gave in, appreciating his care. They made preparations for the baby, building a cradle from wood and sewing tiny clothes. Clara had never sewn anything so small, and she found herself smiling as she stitched little shirts and gowns. She thought about her mother, wishing desperately that she could be here to meet her grandchild. One day in early summer, as Clara was working in the garden, she saw a rider approaching from the direction of Redemption. She felt a moment of panic, old fears rising up, but James was working nearby and he quickly came to her side. The rider turned out to be Sarah, the woman who had given Clara bread the night before she left Redemption. She looked travel-worn and nervous. "I am sorry to intrude," Sarah said as she dismounted, "but I felt I had to come and tell you what has happened." "What is it?" Clara asked. "Redemption is falling apart. After you left, things just got worse. People turned on each other, accusing everyone of every little thing. The Reverend tried to keep control, but he just made things worse with his fire and brimstone sermons. Half the town has left, including my husband and me. We are moving to Silver Creek, and I wanted to stop by and tell you that you were right. You were not the problem, the town was." Clara did not know what to say. Part of her felt vindicated, but mostly she just felt sad. "I am sorry things turned out that way. Do not be sorry. You got out and you made a life for yourself. That is more than most of us can say. This place is beautiful and you look happy." "I am happy," Clara said, and meant it. Sarah stayed for lunch, and Clara introduced her to James properly. Before she left, Sarah hugged Clara tightly and said, "Thank you for showing me that it is possible to start over. I hope we can be friends now that we will be neighbors in Silver Creek." "I would like that," Clara said. After Sarah left, Clara turned to James. "Strange, is it not? How things turn out." "What do you mean?" "They wanted me gone because they thought I was the problem. But I was never the problem. I was just the easiest target. Now they have destroyed themselves and I am here, happy and building a life. It feels like justice in a way." James wrapped his arms around her, careful of her growing belly. "It is justice, and I am glad you are here with me." As summer turned to fall, Clara's belly grew round and heavy. She moved more slowly now, tiring easily, but she was excited to meet her baby. James hovered constantly, worried about every little thing until Clara had to tell him to relax. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine, I know, but I cannot help worrying. You and this baby are everything to me." His words touched her deeply and she kissed him softly. "We are going to be fine, all three of us." On a cool October morning, Clara woke to the first pains of labor. James immediately went into a panic, rushing around gathering supplies and asking what he should do. Clara, despite her own fear, had to calm him down. "Go to Silver Creek and get the midwife," she told him. "I will be all right until you get back. I do not want to leave you alone. You have to, I need help, and you cannot deliver this baby by yourself. Go quickly." James rode like the wind to Silver Creek and returned with the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Fletcher, in record time. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara wondered if she would survive it. But Mrs. Fletcher was experienced and calm, and James held her hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement. Finally, as the sun was setting, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world screaming, his tiny fists waving, and Clara fell instantly in love. James cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son. "He is perfect," James whispered. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after James's father and called him Tommy. He was a hungry, fussy baby who kept them up at all hours, but Clara and James did not care. They were besotted with him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, his dark hair that stuck up in all directions, his blue eyes that would stare at them with serious intensity. The ranch work did not stop just because they had a baby, but they adapted. Clara would work with Tommy strapped to her back or napping nearby in a basket. James would rush through his chores so he could spend time with his son, holding him and talking to him about the ranch and the land and all the things he would teach him when he was older. As winter settled in again, they spent long evenings by the fire as a family. Clara would nurse Tommy while James read aloud from her books, or James would hold the baby while Clara prepared supper. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and they were happy. One night, as they lay in bed with Tommy sleeping in his cradle nearby, James said, "Do you ever think about redemption, about the life you left behind?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but not with regret. I think about my mother, about the good times we had. But I do not miss the town or the people. This is my home now. You and Tommy, this ranch, this is my life. Good, because I cannot imagine my life without you. You have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me those things too, Clara said. You saved me, James, not just from the people in redemption, but from a life where I would have always felt like I did not belong. Here I belong. With you I belong. He kissed her gently, and Clara felt her heart swell with love for this man who had changed everything. They had built a life together out of nothing but hard work and determination and love, and they would continue to build it day by day, year by year. As Tommy grew, the ranch grew with him. James bought more cattle, and Clara expanded her garden. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Pete who was respectful and hardworking. The ranch became profitable, and they were able to save money and make improvements. When Tommy was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Clara's mother. Maggie was a quiet, thoughtful baby with her mother's mismatched eyes, and Clara loved her fiercely. Tommy adored his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her. James built him a small wooden horse to play with, and Tommy would spend hours riding it around the house, pretending to be a cowboy like his father. The years passed in a blur of hard work and joy. There were difficult times, droughts that tested their cattle and cold winters that were harsh and unforgiving. But there were also moments of pure happiness. Tommy's first words, Maggie's first steps, family dinners around the table James had built, evenings on the porch watching the sun set over their land. Clara never forgot where she came from or the people who had tried to break her. But she did not let those memories define her. Instead, she focused on building the life she had always deserved, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was. When Tommy was 5 and Maggie was 3, they had visitors. Sarah and her husband had settled in Silver Creek and had become good friends with Clara and James. They would visit the ranch regularly, and their children would play with Tommy and Maggie. One day, Sarah told Clara that Redemption had become a ghost town. "Most of the buildings are empty now," she said. "The Reverend left last year and the last few families are packing up. It is sad in a way." "It is sad," Clara agreed, "but it is also a reminder that you cannot build a community on hatred and fear." That town destroyed itself because people were more interested in finding scapegoats than in working together. You are right, and look at what you have built here instead. You have created something real and lasting. Your children will grow up knowing they are loved and valued. That is worth more than anything. Clara looked around at her home, at her children playing in the yard, at James working in the corral. Sarah was right. This was worth everything. As the children grew older, Clara made sure they were educated. She taught them to read and write, and she filled their minds with stories and ideas. James taught them about the land, about respecting nature and working hard. Together, they raised children who were curious and kind and unafraid to be themselves. Tommy grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch and dreamed of being a cowboy like his father. Maggie was quieter but just as determined, with a sharp mind and her mother's love of books. Clara knew that her daughter would face challenges because of her unusual eyes, but she was determined to raise Maggie to be strong and proud of who she was. When Clara was 30, she stood on the porch one evening and looked out at the land they had tamed and the life they had built. James came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come. About how different my life is now compared to when we met. Do you remember the night my house almost burned down?" "I remember." "I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met, standing there in your nightgown, trying to fight that fire alone. I was terrified. You were brave, and you still are. Every day you show our children what it means to be strong and resilient. They are lucky to have you as a mother." "They are lucky to have you as a father," Clara countered. "You have given them a stable, loving home. You have shown them that a man can be strong and gentle at the same time." James turned her around to face him. "We make a good team." "Yes, we do." He kissed her, and even after 8 years of marriage, Clara still felt that flutter in her stomach. that sense of being exactly where she belonged. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and James sat by the fire and talked about the future. They wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy the neighboring property that had just come up for sale. They talked about building a better schoolhouse on their land so the children could have a proper education. They talked about growing old together, watching their children have children of their own. "Do you ever regret not having a bigger life?" Clara asked. "Not living in a city or traveling the world?" "Never," James said firmly. "This is the life I always wanted, a home, a family, work that matters. What about you? Do you ever wish you had left Texas altogether, gone somewhere completely new?" Clara thought about it. There had been times, especially in those early dark days in Redemption, when she had dreamed of running away to a big city where no one knew her. But that dream had been born of desperation, not genuine desire. "No," she said. "I belong here, this land, this sky, this life with you. It is more than I ever hoped for." As the years continued to pass, the ranch thrived. They added more cattle, built a bigger barn, and even installed a windmill to pump water from the creek more efficiently. Tommy grew into a capable young man who could rope a steer as well as any grown cowboy. Maggie surprised everyone by showing a talent for training horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and kindness. When Clara was 35, James surprised her with a gift. He had saved up and bought her a beautiful mare, a gentle chestnut with kind eyes. "I thought you deserved a horse of your own," he said. "So you can ride out when you need some space or just want to see more of our land." Clara was deeply touched. She named the mare Rosie and spent hours riding across their property, feeling the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. These rides became her time to think and reflect, to appreciate everything she had built and overcome one day. While riding near the border of their property, Clara saw a woman walking along the road. She was young, probably no more than 20, and she looked exhausted and frightened. Clara immediately rode up to her. "Are you all right?" she asked. The woman looked up, startled. When she saw Clara's mismatched eyes, she flinched slightly but then seemed to collect herself. "I am lost. I was traveling to Silver Creek, but I think I took a wrong turn. I have been walking for hours." "Silver Creek is about 15 miles that way," Clara said, pointing. "But you look like you need rest and food. My ranch is just over that ridge. Come with me and we will give you a meal and directions." The woman hesitated. "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. I know what it is like to be alone and scared. Please let me help you." Something in Clara's voice must have convinced her because the woman nodded. Clara helped her up onto Rosie and they rode back to the ranch together. Over supper, the woman, whose name was Elizabeth, told her story. She had been living in a small town where she had been accused of theft, a crime she did not commit. Rather than face a trial where everyone had already decided she was guilty, she had fled. She was trying to reach Silver Creek where she had a cousin who might take her in. Clara saw herself in Elizabeth's story, the same fear and desperation she had felt in Redemption. "You can stay here tonight," she said. "And tomorrow, James will drive you to Silver Creek in the wagon. It will be safer and faster than walking." "Thank you," Elizabeth said, tears in her eyes. "You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," Clara said softly. That night, Clara told James about Elizabeth, and he agreed immediately to help her. "We have been blessed with so much," he said. "The least we can do is help someone who needs it." The next day, James drove Elizabeth to Silver Creek and helped her find her cousin. When he returned, he told Clara that Elizabeth's cousin had been overjoyed to see her and had promised to help her start over. "You did a good thing yesterday," James said. "That girl was in a bad situation and you helped her without hesitation." "How could I not? I remember what it felt like to be in her place. If you had not helped me, I do not know what would have become of me." James pulled her close. "I am glad I found you that night. I am glad I got to be the one to help you. My life would have been so much emptier without you in it." "And mine without you," Clara whispered. As Tommy approached his 18th birthday, he began talking about starting his own ranch someday. James was proud of his son's ambition and began teaching him everything he knew about running a successful operation. They would spend long hours talking about cattle breeding, land management, and business. Maggie, now 15, had different dreams. She wanted to open a horse training business, working with animals that others had given up on. Clara supported her daughter's ambitions wholeheartedly, remembering her own mother's encouragement to be more than what society expected. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Tommy said, "Pa, do you ever regret leaving the cowboy life behind to settle down here?" James thought about it. No, being a drifting cowboy had its moments, but this life, having a home and a family, this is what I always wanted. The work is hard, but it is ours. Everything we have built, we built together as a family. That means something. What about you, Ma? Maggie asked. Do you ever regret leaving Redemption? Clara smiled. Not even for a moment. That town never appreciated me for who I was. Here I get to be myself. I have a husband who respects me, children who make me proud, and a home that I helped build with my own hands. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. That winter was particularly harsh, with temperatures dropping lower than they had in years. They huddled around the fireplace at night, and James worried constantly about the cattle. He and Tommy would go out in the bitter cold to check on the herd, making sure they had access to water and shelter. One night, a blizzard rolled in with terrifying speed. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled up against the doors and windows. The family stayed inside, keeping the fire burning and praying that the cattle would survive. When the storm finally passed, 2 days later, James and Tommy went out to assess the damage. They lost several head of cattle, which was a blow financially, but most of the herd had survived. They spent weeks repairing damage to the barn and fences, but they got through it together. This is what ranching is, James told Tommy as they worked. It is not always glory and success. Sometimes it is just surviving the hard times and rebuilding when things fall apart. But if you have people you can count on, if you have family, you can get through anything. Tommy nodded, taking his father's words to heart. When spring finally arrived, it felt like a rebirth. The land turned green again, wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, and new calves were born. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything they had and everyone in her life. On a warm April evening, Clara and James sat on the porch, watching the sun set. Their children were inside, and for a moment they were alone together, something that happened rarely these days. "Do you remember the first night we spent here?" Clara asked. "When the house was not even built yet and we slept under the stars." "I remember. I remember thinking that I was taking a huge gamble bringing you here. I barely knew you, and I was asking you to trust me with your life. It was the best decision I ever made, trusting you." James took her hand. "We have built something good here, Clara, something that will outlast us. Our children will carry on this ranch and maybe their children after them. We have created a legacy." "A legacy of hard work and love," Clara said. "That is all anyone can ask for." As the years continued, Clara and James watched their children grow into adults. Tommy married a lovely young woman from Silver Creek named Rebecca, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Maggie opened her horse training business, and she quickly gained a reputation as someone who could work miracles with difficult animals. Clara became a grandmother when Tommy and Rebecca had their first child, a little girl they named Clara after her. Holding her namesake in her arms, Clara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had survived, had built a life worth living, and now that life was continuing into the next generation. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been in Redemption, scared and alone, desperate for someone to see her as something other than a problem. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that she would find a home and a family and a love that would sustain her through anything. But she could not go back. All she could do was move forward, cherishing each day with the man who had built her a house on the edge of nowhere and shown her what it meant to be truly loved. When Clara was 45, She and James took a rare trip into Silver Creek to celebrate their anniversary. They left the ranch in Tommy's capable hands and spent 2 nights in a hotel, enjoying the luxury of not having to work from dawn to dusk. They walked through the town, hand in hand, and Clara marveled at how much it had grown since they had first come here. There were new shops and houses, and the population had doubled. It was a thriving community, the opposite of what Redemption had become. "Do you ever wonder what happened to the people from Redemption?" James asked as they sat in a restaurant, enjoying a meal they had not had to cook themselves. "Sometimes. I hope some of them found better lives elsewhere. I hope some of them learned from what happened and became kinder people. But mostly I do not think about them at all. They are part of my past, and I am focused on my present and my future." "That is a healthy way to look at it," James said. "You have nothing to prove to anyone, least of all to people who treated you badly." "No, I do not. I have proved everything I needed to prove to myself. I have shown that I could survive, that I could build a good life despite everything." "That is enough." On their last night in Silver Creek, they attended a dance at the town hall. Clara wore a new dress she had made, and James wore his best suit. They danced together, moving easily across the floor, and Clara felt young again, carefree and happy. "I love you," James whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I have loved you since the night I saw you standing in front of that burning house, refusing to give up. You are the strongest, most amazing woman I have ever known." "I love you too," Clara said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "You gave me everything. A home, a family, a life worth living. I will never be able to thank you enough for that. You do not need to thank me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They danced until late into the night, surrounded by friends and neighbors, part of a community that valued them for who they were. It was everything Clara had never dared to dream of, and she savored every moment. When they returned to the ranch, they found that Tommy and Rebecca had expanded the herd and made several improvements to the property. Their granddaughter was walking now, toddling around with determination, and she squealed with delight when she saw Clara. Maggie had taken on an apprentice, a young woman from town who wanted to learn horse training. Clara was proud of her daughter for passing on her skills, for creating opportunities for other women who might not otherwise have them. As Clara entered her 50s, she began to slow down a bit. The years of hard work had taken their toll on her body, and she found herself tiring more easily. But she did not mind. She had lived a full life, had accomplished more than she ever thought possible. She spent more time now teaching her granddaughter to read and write, passing on the gift her own mother had given her. She told the little girl stories about her grandmother Margaret, about the importance of education and thinking for herself. She wanted to make sure that the next generation of women in her family would never have to feel small or less than because of their gender. James, too, was slowing down. His hair had turned silver, and his face was weathered from years in the sun. But to Clara, he was still the handsome cowboy who had saved her life all those years ago. They still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sun set, still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. One evening, as they sat together, Clara said, "Do you know what I am most proud of?" "What?" "That we built all of this without compromising who we are. We did not have to change or conform or pretend to be something we are not. We created a life where we could be ourselves, and we raised children who feel the same way. That is a real accomplishment." James squeezed her hand. "You are right. We built something real here, something honest. Our children know they are loved for who they are, not for who they pretend to be. That is the greatest gift we could give them." As the years passed, Clara and James gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Tommy. They still helped where they could, but they also took time to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They would ride out together on horseback, exploring the land they had tamed, remembering the early days when it had been just the two of them against the world. When Clara was 60, James surprised her with another gift. He had commissioned a local craftsman to make a beautiful wooden sign that read, "New Hope Ranch EST, 1878 Thornton Family." He mounted it at the entrance to their property, a permanent marker of what they had built together. Clara cried when she saw it, overcome with emotion. "It is perfect," she said. "It is absolutely perfect." "We have built something that will last," James said. "Long after we are gone, this ranch will still be here, and people will know that Clara and James Thornton built it with their own hands and a lot of love." That summer, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a big party. Tommy and Rebecca hosted it, and friends and neighbors came from miles around. Sarah and her family were there, and they toasted to old friendships and new beginnings. As Clara looked around at all the people who had come to celebrate with them, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was her life, her family, her legacy. She had started with nothing, had been driven from her home by hatred and fear, and she had built all of this. In her speech, she said, "40 years ago, I met a man who saw me not as a problem or a curse, but as a person worthy of respect and love. He built me a house on the edge of nowhere and gave me a home in his heart. Everything we have, everything we are, we built together. And I would not change a single moment of it." James stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and added, "Clara Thornton is the bravest, strongest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. She has made my life better in every possible way. Here is to 40 more years." Everyone cheered and toasted, and the party continued late into the night. Clara danced with James, with her son, with her grandchildren. She laughed until her sides hurt and felt more alive than she had in years. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Clara and James stood on the porch of the house they had built together. The moon was bright overhead, casting silver light across the land. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees. "We did good," James said softly. "Yes, we did," Clara agreed. "We did real good." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, looking out at the empire they had built from nothing but determination and love. It had not been easy. There had been droughts and blizzards, financial struggles and personal losses. But they had faced everything together, and they had prevailed. As they grew older, Clara and James took comfort in the knowledge that their legacy was secure. Tommy ran the ranch with skill and dedication, and he was teaching his own children the values of hard work and integrity. Maggie's horse training business was thriving, and she had trained dozens of young women in the art of working with animals. They had grandchildren, and now even great-grandchildren, a whole new generation that bore their bloodline and their values. The Thornton family had become respected in the region, known for their fairness and their generosity. Clara often thought about the town of Redemption, about the people who had wanted her gone. She had heard through the years that the town had eventually been abandoned completely, swallowed up by the desert and time. There was a certain poetic justice in that, she thought. The town that had tried to destroy her had destroyed itself instead, while she had thrived. She held no bitterness anymore, just a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had been right. She had been worthy of love and respect all along. The problem had never been her. It had been people who were too narrow-minded to see beyond their own prejudices. When Clara was 68, James fell ill. It was pneumonia, brought on by a cold winter and too many years of hard work. Clara nursed him devotedly, sitting by his bedside day and night, praying that he would recover. He did recover, but it was a slow process, and it reminded them both that they were no longer young. They began to talk more seriously about their mortality, about what would happen when one of them was gone. "Promise me something," James said one night as Clara sat beside his bed. "Promise me that if I go first, you will not spend the rest of your life mourning. You will keep living, keep finding joy in things." "I promise," Clara said, though the thought of life without James was almost unbearable. "But you have to promise me the same thing." "I promise. Though I do not know how I would manage without you, you have been my partner, my love, my everything. And you have been mine." They held hands in the darkness, two people who had built a life together against all odds. They had been young once, full of hope and fear and determination. Now they were old, but the love between them had only grown stronger with time. James recovered slowly, and by spring he was back on his feet, though he was not as strong as he had been. Clara insisted he take it easy, and for once James listened to her. They spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the world go by, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. One warm summer evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, James said, "You know, I have been thinking about that first night we spent here when we were building the house. I have been thinking about it too. We were so young and naive, thinking we could build a ranch from nothing. But we did it. Against all odds, we did it." "We did," Clara agreed, "because we had each other, because we refused to give up." James turned to her, his blue eyes still as clear and kind as they had been all those years ago. "I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift. Every moment, every memory, every challenge we faced together, it has all been worth it." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "I feel the same way. You saved my life, James. Not just that night when you put out the fire, but every day since then. You showed me what it means to be loved and valued. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought I had nothing left." "We saved each other," James said. "We built this life together, and it has been the greatest adventure I could have imagined." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, holding hands the way they had for 50 years. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Cattle grazed in the distance, horses moved lazily in the corral, and smoke rose from the chimney of Tommy's house across the way. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the buildings or the livestock, but the family they had raised and the values they had instilled. They had shown their children and grandchildren that love could conquer prejudice, that determination could overcome any obstacle, and that home was not a place, but the people you chose to build a life with. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara leaned her head on James's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for building me a house on the edge of nowhere." James kissed the top of her head and replied, "Thank you for making it a home." They sat there as the night deepened around them, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The town had wanted her gone for being different, but the cowboy had seen her for who she truly was. He had built her a house on the edge of nowhere, and together they had filled it with love, laughter, and a family that would carry on long after they were gone. And that, Clara thought as she drifted off to sleep in James's arms, was the best revenge of all. Not bitterness or anger, but a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure. Years later, when both Clara and James had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their family gathered at New Hope Ranch to celebrate their lives. Tommy, now an old man himself, stood before the gathering and spoke about his parents with pride and love. "My mother and father taught us that it does not matter where you come from or what others think of you. What matters is how you treat people, how hard you work, and how much love you put into everything you do. They built this ranch from nothing, and they raised us to believe that we could accomplish anything if we were willing to work for it and support each other." He gestured to the land around them, to the thriving ranch that had grown far beyond what Clara and James had started. This is their legacy. Not just the land, but the values they instilled in all of us. Love, respect, determination, and the courage to be yourself no matter what anyone else thinks. That is what they gave us, and that is what we will pass on to our children and grandchildren. The family raised their glasses in a toast to Clara and James Thornton, the woman who had been driven from her town for being different, and the cowboy who had built her a house on the edge of nowhere. Together, they had created something that would last for generations, a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. And in the evening breeze that whispered through the cottonwood trees, it almost seemed like you could still hear them, sitting on their porch, laughing together as the sun set over the land they had tamed and the life they had built with their own two hands and hearts full of love.